can you say a few words so we can hear you as well? And you unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you. Thank you. Our collective obeisance. I'm sorry?
You're dressed like, you look like a Spanish conquistador. I think this is what Magellan used to wear. Anyway, doesn't matter. Go ahead and ask questions. Yeah, I'm not hearing you. I think you have to unmute yourself.
First, I wanted to welcome you. Can you hear me now?
Okay. Bring a chair. Yes, I can hear you.
And from a collective welcome and obeisances from all of us. And thank you for joining us. I would like to read a little bio. Unless you want. I would like to read a little bio for those unfortunate people who don't know you, get a better idea who you are.
Okay, go ahead.
Mukunda Goswami was born as Michael Grant in Portland, Oregon. After graduating from Reed College, he became a professional jazz musician and moved to New York to pursue his music career. In 1965, met the Hare Krishna founder, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The next year, he was in the first group of initiated devotees, disciples, receiving the Sanskrit name Mukunda Das. Mukunda was a pioneer in the early days of the Hare Krishna movement. In 1966, in New York City, he helped Bhaktivedanta Swami to rent a storefront for the first Hare Krishna temple. In 1967, he founded the first Hare Krishna Temple in San Francisco and organized a major music event, the Mantra Rock Dance. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada sent Mukunda and wife Janaki and two other devotee couples to London in 1968, where they established ISKCON in England. The devotees met Beatle George Harrison, as well as assisting them in opening the Radha Krishna Temple there. Harrison produced an album of their devotional music titled The Radha Krishna Temple. The album was released on Apple Records in 1971. Mukunda, credited Mukunda Dasa Goswami, wrote the musical arrangements for the songs. The temple's 1969 hit single Hare Krishna Mantra climbed the pop charts, including the UK singles chart. The devotees toured Europe and also appeared on England's Top of the Pops TV show. The song made the devotees famous and proved to be a significant event in establishing ISKCON in Europe. George Harrison considered Mukunda and the others who first came to England to be his lifelong friends. Mukunda established the ISKCON Communications Office in Los Angeles in 1977. Publications included the ISKCON World Review, starting in 1981, and a series of paperback books, Search for Liberation, Chant and Be Happy, Coming Back, and a Higher Taste Vegetarian Cookbook. Other publications included Who Are They magazine, Omni magazine, and the ISKCON Communications Journal. Mukunda Goswami is still an ISKCON Communications Journal Advisory Board member. And you wrote, certainly co-wrote, Divine Nature, and you wrote your own book, Miracle on Second Avenue, which was a fantastic book. I want to ask you, after you talk, I want to ask you about a couple of things about that. But now I leave the ball on your court. Thank you for joining us. Take it away.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about my first meetings with Prabhupada before 26 Second Avenue. They took place in the Bowery. The Bowery is kind of a slum, and not kind of a slum, it is a slum. If you've ever been to the east side of the street or the west side of the street, it's full of flop houses and drunks and people lying dead on the sidewalks. It comes from the original word, I think, is bower. The word bower appears in teachings of Prabhupada as a place to be shaded from the sun. A bower is something that's kind of an upside down U shape that's made out of flowers and leaves and twigs. And sometimes Radha and Krishna took shelter in a bower because it shaded them from the scorching light of the sun. But in the early part of the 1920s, the Bowery became synonymous with a slum. And that's where Prabhupada was when I met him. I got a piece of paper from a friend of mine who told me if I wanted to, I could go there and hear the Swami speak. So I wrote it down, or he gave me the piece of paper, and it was a very dingy kind of place. It was on the 4th floor, called Artist in Residence function. The AIR sign was on the front of the building. AIR means Artist in Residence. And of course, there was no artist living there, and there was no one else in the building on the first 3 floors. On the 4th floor was Prabhupada and his one helper, a young man, and that was it. And there were bare light bulbs hanging from the ceiling, and the roof had the ceiling was just bare beams, and there were some cobwebs in there, and it was a very dingy and dark kind of place. And there, at the far end of the building, opposite the street side, which centered onto the Bowery or 3rd Avenue, which was a very noisy place. There was traffic going both directions in 2 lanes, and you could hear the rumble of trucks and cars all the time. It was very noisy, but Prabhupada was very effulgent, and he was very illuminating, and he had the look of a scholar. He looked very clean, and it was a very unfortunate setting, but he looked very clean and scholarly. He had a book spread out in front of him. I think it was in Sanskrit. I think it was the Srimad Bhagavatam. And that's when I first met him. But anyway, if you have some questions, you can ask me.
I do. This guy that was hosting Prabhupada, his name was Paul, right? And
I can't remember, maybe.
And well, I've been reading Yogeshwar's book, where he mentions quite a few details. For example, and you told me many years ago that you used to transcribe music for Pharoah Sanders and what was his name? The other saxophone player, soprano sax. I can't remember. Eric Dolphy. That's true?
Well, it's sort of not really true, but I did some transcription work for musicians like Roland Kirk and a few other people.
Wow.
That's what I was doing before Prabhupada. And I took Pharaoh to meet him. I took him to the loft, and the first words I uttered to Prabhupada when I first met him were, I knew he was from India, so I told him that I had a tambura. I have a tambura was the first thing I said to him. So he asked me to, and he made a gesture kind of like with this right hand saying, bring it. So I brought it. And he was lecturing on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in that place. So I brought the tambura, and I sat right in front of him. He was seated on a kind of a platform. It was kind of a makeshift arrangement on the 4th floor of the Bowery loft. And so I listened very carefully, and I was trying to figure out what ragas he was singing in. That was my second meeting. And it was a very dingy place. And I just thought, well, I would go and check it out, this address. I didn't think maybe that it was going to be very interesting, but it was very interesting. And I thought, because Prabhupada was alone, he didn't have a wife, he didn't have a house, he didn't have a car, he didn't have any income, and he seemed very happy. And in retrospect, I think I was thinking, I want to be like that. So he told me he had some books, and I got the first 3 Srimad Bhagavatams, and he said that it'll cost $15. And I only had, I think, $5. And he said, well, that's all right. Just give me what you have, and you can pay the rest later. So I took the books, and I was reading them constantly after I met him. And I was just oblivious to everything else that was going on around me. I was haunted by those books. I just kept reading and reading and reading. Even when I had to go outside, I was reading the books and walking down the street and oblivious to traffic all around me, because I just was so engrossed in reading the books. And I thought, well, I had met the author, and I had a philosophy that was very, very interesting and very engaging. And even though I was a bit of an author, and I realized that this wasn't perfect composition, I just was, I felt that I had ended my search.
Did you understand Prabhupada's accent from a get-go?
It was difficult because he had a very pronounced accent, not only Indian, but Bengali. But it's very difficult to understand. And all of his talk was laced liberally with Sanskrit. So there were so many Sanskrit verses in there. But the message came through, even though it was, I couldn't understand a lot of the words, but I was very impressed with the whole situation.
We have a question from Yasudev. Please go ahead. Can you unmute and unvideo yourself?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So nice to see you. Please accept my humble obeisances. My name is Yashodeva Das. Maharaj, I read your book a while ago, and I loved it. So fascinated by the story. And what strikes me as most fascinating, Maharaj, is how you and a few others were so inspired by Srila Prabhupada even before he was such a big deal. For the rest of us, of course, we know Prabhupada as the Yugacharya, the Parivajakacharya, but you met Prabhupada and it was hardly a dozen of you. So I'm wondering, first I just want to express my appreciation for how you were inspired by Srila Prabhupada, even though he wasn't yet, world famous. And I guess I want to ask you, if it's all right, Maharaj, if you felt a little surprised or shocked or even just surprised that ISKCON then grew into such a big thing. Like, did you ever expect that Srila Prabhupada and his followers would become a worldwide organization? Were you surprised that that happened, or did you expect that it would just be the small group that you were familiar with in New York?
Actually, I didn't expect it to amount to much of anything. But after I think I first met Prabhupada in May of 1966. And then in November, I went to the West Coast. I was in New York, where I met him on the Bowery. And then when I went to the West Coast, I went to San Francisco, and I got a letter from Prabhupada with a newspaper clipping from the New York Times, which said that Allen Ginsberg had participated, that he came. And Allen Ginsberg, as I knew him, was a famous man. He was kind of like a poet, a famous poet of the underground at that time. And reading the article, which was kind of like very, you might say, complimentary and very interesting, I thought, well, it may just become a great movement. I mean, it was the first thing I had that it was going to ever amount to anything more than just one single man from Bengal who was preaching Krishna consciousness. And this is the first time I had any idea that it would turn into something fairly major. And I treasured that thought.
A little follow-up on that. When I read your book, Miracle on 26th Avenue, there was a difference between your account of Prabhupada and other books that I read, because it followed a progression. Like, first, you didn't see Prabhupada as the Shakti-Avish avatar, like, all this incredible personality. You basically explain your journey, your inner journey from the very beginning. You saw Prabhupada as an old Indian man coming to America, and then your appreciation and your love began to grow. So I imagine this reflects what you actually experienced. So what happened in the beginning? Did you have a aha moment? It was kind of an epiphany. Did you try to tell all your friends and your relatives about Prabhupada, or this simply happened more in a more organic way, and it took its time?
I think with me, it was more of an organic situation. It wasn't a sudden realization. What happened when I went to the West Coast, I visited some friends of mine, and we decided, and as I was leaving from Prabhupada in New York, and I turned my back on him, and I started to walk out the door, and he said, just try to start at a center when you're on the West Coast. And I didn't think much of that. I just thought it was kind of an afterthought, but it stuck in my mind. And then when I got to the West Coast, I decided that that's what I wanted to do. I had met some friends and they were involved in the sort of alternative group of people. And that's exactly what happened. We went to San Francisco and in pursuance of what Prabhupada said, we started a temple. And we rented a storefront that looked very much like 26 2nd Avenue. That was the beginning of the first temple on the West Coast of the United States.
Is that the temple in Frederick Street?
Yes, that's where it was, on Frederick Street. It's on the sort of a cusp of the Haight-Ashbury, and it had become a mecca for alternative lifestyle people who are creating what they thought was a spiritual, or in their concept of spiritual, a revolution in the consciousness of the United States. And Allen Ginsberg was part of it, and Timothy Leary, who is a Harvard professor, was promoting people to take drugs like LSD, and it became sort of a happening place for the youth of the world, or of the United States anyway.
I don't know when was the last time you were there, but it is now a coin-operated laundromat.
Yes, unfortunately, it is. It wasn't purchased and made into a place of pilgrimage. I've seen pictures of the laundromat, and unfortunately, that's what it became. But very soon it became, in the days of our going there for the beginning, it became a temple. It had a carpet. We created a place for Prabhupada to sit that was on a raised platform, and deities of Jagannath, Subhadra, and Balaram. So it became a temple. And then later on, it stopped being a temple and became something very mundane.
Even when I went there maybe a couple of years ago, the laundromat attendant was a little annoyed that so many people will come and ask the same thing about the Hare Krishna Temple to a coin-operated laundromat. So devotees know about that.
Yes, that's where it was. And then it was just an unusual place to start a temple. It was right, not in the heart of the Haight-Ashbury, but very nearby. And many of the young people who came there, and it was their form of spirituality. And so the place became very crowded with people. Sometimes there were 50, 60, 70, 80 or more hippies in that temple, just to hear what Prabhupada had to say.
Did you feel comfortable around Prabhupada, or you felt a little awkward? Did you try to avoid him or hid in the back, or you just felt like at home, that you could access him at any given time and Prabhupada allow you this privilege?
I always felt like I had a connection with him, and I felt like I was one of the inner circle because I had some personal association with Prabhupada. And I did bring some of my friends, my relatives, to hear him. And I was very impressed with what he said, but he didn't live right in that building. He lived nearby. And it was just very interesting. I used to compliment him on his classes, and I kept on reading. And gradually, I decided to become a missionary. And a few months later, I decided to go to England. So we have kind of an adventure.
I have a couple of questions from Mekavira and Brajalila, and then Bhaktayev, I believe. Go ahead, Brajalila, unmute yourself.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Maharaj. Hare Krishna. So I apologize to shift the conversation a bit from your exalted service to Srila Prabhupada. I wanted to, myself and Ekavira Prabhu, we never got an opportunity to thank you for the affection and the appreciation you showed us for His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, our spiritual master, our Gurudev. And I just want to share how eternally grateful we are for you being such an embodiment of support and appreciation. And we cherish the time that you were with us at the Institute. Thank you, in Washington. Thank you. I still remember you coming in the airport with our Guru Maharaj, and we greeting you there. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thanks for your kind words, but I always respond by saying that if it hadn't been me, it would have been somebody else. So I don't deserve any personal praise or compliments. It just one of those things that it was kind of an adventure for me, and it was not my own doing. It was just what I wanted to do. It was very selfish.
Another question, yes? Sonia?
Yes, I have a question. Haribol Maharaji, accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So delighted to see you, Maharaji. I'm always in awe of the fact that knowing that everything that you did, and everybody's talking about that, like you were part of that inner circle, you were part of that initial, you may not have been part of that explosion like you just referred to, but you were always part of that initial growth and everything that happened initially to get it to that platform. And yet you have always been so humble. Like I know I had the good fortune of meeting you and being here in Potomac, Maryland with you for so many years, and always just got so much of great guidance from you. And I'm hoping that I can continue to get that. But how have you always remained so humble and calm about everything? I know you say that, oh, it would have happened anyways, but still you were part of that. And yet every time we were with you, we never felt that you never felt like you're important. You never felt like, oh, you had anything to do with it. And your humility. And I'm still wondering how.
It's interesting that the Prabhupada, I heard about the so-called explosion of Hare Krishna while I was in England, and it was kind of amazing to read about how things had advanced. And it took almost 13 months before Prabhupada appeared on British soil. And when he first came, he was kind of given a red carpet treatment because it was just a few days after Apple had released the Hare Krishna mantra, which became a famous recording, 45 recording in the UK. And what happened was they arranged something called the VIP, very important person room, for Prabhupada to come into. So the airplane landed on the tarmac, and Prabhupada went through the customs formalities on the tarmac. He didn't have to go through a waiting in line. It was all arranged by Apple and Company, who put out the record. And then he was escorted into the VIP room where about 10 devotees were waiting for him. And after he talked a little bit, he was all of a sudden surrounded by what we call the Fleet Street boys, the sort of middle-aged, bespectacled tough guys from the press. And they started to question him. The first thing they asked him, what have you come here to teach? And Prabhupada's response, after a moment's hesitation, was, I've come to teach you what you have all forgotten, and that is God. And for the first time, I probably it was the first time, I saw these Fleet Street people, these very aggressive and reporters, sort of stumped. They couldn't say anything. And then Prabhupada went on to say, in the silence that ensued, that he was coming to teach about God and who God is and where he is and so on and so forth. So it was a very impressive first meeting for the people of the Fleet Street, where all the major newspapers were located. And they wrote very favorably. And the next day, a picture came out that was on one of the newspapers, had a big picture of a two-page spread of Prabhupada. It said, enter A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. And it was a very impressive, and Prabhupada liked the picture so much that he asked one of his devotees in the United States to paint it, to make a painting out of that very picture. And I think it was Jadharani who painted it. And he really liked the reporting and the photograph. That paper, by the way, doesn't exist anymore. You had to go to a very sort of archival location in a different part of London to find out if it even existed, because it does exist, but it's not, the paper doesn't exist anymore.
When is that Prabhupada was asked, what's his definition of hell? That was in London.
I don't know if I was there, but one of his famous repartee or rejoinders is that nobody is healthy, everybody is dying. And someone once asked him why is the death rate in India so low? And he said, it's the same everywhere. It's 1,000%. In other words, everybody has to die. That was his comment. And so even though he was asked sort of very topical questions, he responded with very incisive comments, very adroit and very penetrating remarks.
When you were in London, you spent quite some time without seeing Srila Prabhupada. How did you all felt, all 6 of you?
We felt that we were kind of what you would say on a mission to get a temple in the central part of the city. And we got letters from Prabhupada almost every 10 days or 2 weeks. And those letters kept us alive because we knew that he was the mastermind behind all this activity, and everything that was being done for him. And it was those letters that kept us alive, even though we didn't have the advantage of his physical presence for almost a year, a little over a year. But when he did come to London, it was at the time when the Hare Krishna mantra record had been released. And one of the first things he asked us when he came was, how is that recording? And we told him, well, it sold 70,000 copies in one day, the day before. And he lit up and his eyes opened wide and he said, oh, very big business. And that was 2 days after. And then it just skyrocketed into one of the most famous recordings in history, in the history of the music business in England, anyway. Another thing that happened shortly after Prabhupada was in the VIP room at the Heathrow airport, where he arrived, he was whisked away in a white Rolls Royce that John Lennon seemed to own. And in the confusion, nobody got in the car with him. It was just Prabhupada and the driver, and Prabhupada's assistant, who didn't know anything about England. He was an American guy. And we didn't meet up with him until we got to John Lennon's estate, where we were all located for about 3 months.
Anybody wants to ask anything from Maharaj?
And just a little bit of unrelated, but just wanted to just check on you, Maharaj, just to see how your health is doing.
Well, I feel that at the age of 79, I'm lucky to be alive. I don't have any major life-threatening illnesses, but anyway, I need your good wishes and blessings so that I can carry on and be a trooper a little longer.
We need you.
This Zoom way that I can communicate with a lot of people that are all over the world, and I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
It is certainly our pleasure. I want to bring you back to 1966 when you met Prabhupada. Your girlfriend at the time wasn't with you, was she?
No, the first time I met Prabhupada, I didn't go with anyone else. I just went alone, and it was a very. I didn't know what to expect. There were some Bowery livers that were sitting on the stoop, and the door was unlocked, and I had to go up 4 flights in the dark. And finally, I reached the top, and I saw Prabhupada at the other end of the room, looking very effulgent. I really didn't know what to expect. That was the very, very first countenance meeting I had with him, and it was very impressive. I just didn't know what to think or what to expect. I just thought I'll listen to see what he has to say. And there were about 4 or 5 other people sitting on the floor listening as much as possible as was happening in those days.
And the second time you went, who did you bring along?
The second time I also went alone. The second time I went, it was during the daytime, and there was no buzzer, no bell. So I did what New Yorkers sometimes do when there's no other way to reach someone on the fourth floor. And I started throwing coins, pennies, up to the fourth floor window. And Prabhupada finally stuck his head out the window and made a gesture with his index finger as if to say, I'll be right down. He didn't say anything. He just said, I'll be right down. He climbed down the 4 flights of stairs and back up to where he was. And we had just the two of us had a very interesting and enlivening personal. I mean, it was enlivening because I didn't know what to say, but he did. And I told him that I was probably going to go to India and study the Indian flute. And they asked me what I did. And I said, I played the keyboards. And he said, oh, I can teach you how to play the piano for Krishna. And I thought, well, that's impossible. I'll maybe flute, but piano, no way. And I very tactfully changed the subject.
Did you feel that your life was changing as you were getting to meet Prabhupada every time?
I didn't feel that my life was changing, but I felt that I had read many books about Buddhism and the third eye and this and that, and I thought that I don't have to go any further to read it because I found what I wanted. I felt that I had read the books, I had met the author, and I didn't have to search any further. But the whole thing, it took me maybe a couple of years before I really got into the missionary spirit and before I started to understand the relationship between a guru and a student. The whole thing was very, very organic and very slow, and it wasn't a sudden realization or epiphany like you mentioned.
How did you convince your girlfriend to go see Prabhupada?
Well, I realized that somehow or other what Prabhupada was saying was true, and that it was sinful to live with a woman and not be married. So I proposed a marriage to her, and although she agreed, and that went on. And then he performed a wedding ceremony. I think it was the first wedding ceremony he actually performed. And her sister, Jamuna, came all the way from California, which is on the other side of the country, to New York, which is about a 3,500-mile journey to cook for the wedding. So that became a cause célèbre. And there were a few people, and they were part of it. And that's where Jamuna learned how to cook and just stopped smoking cigarettes.
Did you learn? Of course, you had Prabhupada's cooking, and did you learn how to cook, either from him or did you learn how to?
Today, I can only make one or two things, but Jamuna learned a lot about cooking and cleanliness from Srila Prabhupada, and he bequeathed her the knowledge of so much knowledge about cooking that she even wrote a book that's still become a classic or a legendary book, the Lord Krishna's Cuisine, I think it's called.
Yes, we all.
Anyway, I could talk because I have written a whole book about this, about my adventures with Srila Prabhupada, and I think it could just go on and on without stop.
Please do. There's nobody here who will stop you.
Well, I'm just waiting for some more questions so I can get stimulated to speak and say what I want to say anything.
How?
So if there's nothing.
Were you still?
May I ask a question?
Yeah, just give me one moment. Were you still playing music as you were participating in Prabhupada's programs?
I had decided pretty much to renounce the whole music industry, and it wasn't until we were making recordings with the Beatles, with the Radha Krishna Temple album, that I started to resume some of the old keyboard talent that I had. But I wasn't very involved in the whole music industry, and after that song became popular, we had to go to many venues. Sometimes very seedy nightclubs full of drunken people. And I realized that the music business wasn't really all it was cut out to be, especially if you weren't, even if you were famous, but if you were like newcomers like we were, it was just an unpleasant experience.
Go ahead, Rojalita.
Thank you very much. Maharaj, we have a small group here in Gitanagari where we're reading now the Lilamrita, and we're in the section where you actually are in London. And we read on Sunday that when Srila Prabhupada came to the estate where you were staying, that he was given a very small and very damp room to stay in. And I was wondering if you can share a little bit about that, because there wasn't any mention of Jamuna there and what she was doing at that time. And, you know, so I just a little curious of what was happening during that period.
Well, I don't know if Satsarup mentioned this in his book, but where we were all staying were the servants' quarters. It was a estate called Tittenhurst, and it was formerly owned by the Cadbury people. Cadbury chocolates became very famous in London. Cadbury, it's a chocolate bar like Hershey bar, but everybody knows about Cadbury. So this place where we were staying was the servants' quarters of the. And the Cadbury people lived in a mansion where John Lennon was living in the main house. But where Prabhupada stayed, and all of England at that time, it was in September, was dark and cold and damp. And Prabhupada stayed in the second floor and in one room. And Jamuna did some cooking on the ground floor. And it was just a it was nice, but it was sort of unpleasant because it was the damp part of it was the servants' quarters, and Prabhupada told us in a car once that he said that your country is the best country, and he was remarking about how many old buildings and were being torn down and in England, and how it had lost its empire status and become sort of a shopkeeper's nation, as you might say. It had lost its former glory. And Prabhupada was painfully aware of that as he drove around the city and saw everything, how it was, and how England was gradually losing its stature as a world empire. He once referred to a picture of, it was a cartoon of someone in a hospital bed, that his leg was held up by tractions, and somehow or other it was the symbol of the British Empire, and Prabhupada cited that drawing as what had happened to the British Empire, that it was now a wounded, hospitalized shopkeeper's nation. It wasn't what it is, nothing like its former glorious status. And he was before the partition in 1947. He was part of the colony of India. Was one of the most important colonies probably for England, and Prabhupada could see that it had lost its status, and they practically worshipped England. There was a saying that on goods, that if it said made in England, it was very good. If it said made in India, it was very bad. They were very expert at propaganda, and the British people really liked going to India to get out of the cold, damp, rainy, dark island of England. And when they came to India, because it was very warm and tropical, and it was one of their, it was like the jewel in the crown, but it only lasted up until 1947. And at that time, they just realized it was a no-win situation, and they all gave up.
Yashodeva Prabhu?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I've heard it said by someone that that in the beginning, in very early ISKCON, when it was just you and a few others, that it was very much like a family, and Prabhupada was the father. And then as things expanded a lot more, Prabhupada was much more like an entrepreneur for Krishna's enterprises. And then later, as ISKCON was becoming worldwide, that his attitude shifted again. He was much more like a general managing an army. And I'm wondering if you noticed any marked change in Srila Prabhupada's, I don't know, behavior or attitude as ISKCON was growing so quickly.
I didn't notice very much change in Prabhupada himself, but I was very painfully aware of how this huge bureaucracy had grown up around him, and that it was almost impossible to have a personal one-on-one meeting with him without him being surrounded by his very a strong contingent of confidants who were his secretaries and his ministers and various other people. So things had changed, and I was very aware of that. But Prabhupada himself maintained his very humble attitude, even though it had grown into a huge operation worldwide. But it was one of the most amazing things that I think attracted me and a lot of other people to Prabhupada was the fact that even though the movement had grown and become very widespread, that he sort of didn't at all lose his humility. That he was the center of it and he was the leader of it, but it never dawned on him to be a controller.
I was reading in the third volume of Chasing Rhinos with the Swami that Shyamasundar said that you were very special to Prabhupada, even in the eyes of others. He noticed that Prabhupada was asking about you and noticing you wherever you were. And obviously this was for more than what the service you offered, because other people also offered their service. So did you feel this reciprocation? Do you feel that you were somewhat special, even if he was at the time surrounded by all his secretaries and presidents and all that stuff?
I felt that because I had a personal rapport with Prabhupada from the very start, even before Second Avenue, that was always going to be there. And it did remain, even though I saw a very large movement grow up all around him. It remained that I always had a very kind of personal relationship with him. So what happened was, at a certain point, he had come into conflict with the guy he was living with, who was only about 17 or 18 years old. And he came to my place with his suitcase. He had decided to leave that place. And then I thought, well, and I said, what's the problem? And it was very early in the morning. It was like, for me anyway, it was about 6 o'clock in the morning. And I was just sort of like drowsy from the night before. I probably had my share of whatever. And I was pretty hungover. And he said that, well, I was taking a shower and then we had a dispute about the soap and he ill-named me. And I said, well, I was thinking to myself, well, what's so serious about a little swearing, ill-naming? He was very much a master of euphemism. He was using those gentle terms like ill-named. And then I realized that then he told a little parable about a person who sits opposite a guru and then kills the guru, kills the person who's sitting opposite and sits in his place and becomes a guru. And I was thinking, well, this 17-year-old it sounds like he's maybe capable of murder. I mean, it kind of frightened me because it was such an incisive story. And then I realized after that Prabhupada was, had left that place on his own because he wanted a different place where people were a little more sane. I found out later that this guy had been taking a lot of LSD or something, and that he had, by his own admission, he had ruined his, quote, ruined his mind. And but I thought that Prabhupada wanted to stay where I stayed, and I didn't want that to happen because I wasn't ready to surrender completely, even though I had a big place and it was well furnished. It had a piano and a set of drums and other instruments like a vibroharp. And I thought, well, it's going to be too noisy for Prabhupada. So my excuse was that I couldn't do it. You couldn't stay here because you just wouldn't get any sleep. And what he ended up doing was staying with a friend of mine who lived about 4 streets away for a few days. And then I realized that I had to get Prabhupada a better place. It was just ridiculous that he had to stay in this loft after loft. And that's when I went to this newsstand. It was the first newsstand that the Village Voice newspaper came out in. And I was in a kind of like on a mission in those days. I thought, well, I've got to help this man. And that's where I found the want ad for 26 Second Avenue. And I made an appointment with the rental agent to meet him with Prabhupada. And that's how Second Avenue was eventually acquired. Anyway, that's the story. how funny, how it went from an ad for a storefront that was for rent to a temple, and it became a sort of a famous temple. It became like the first temple, actually.
Prabhupada was staying.
So if there's no,
Prabhupada was staying in the apartment on the second floor behind 26 Second Avenue, but nobody stayed overnight at the storefront.
yeah, a few people stayed overnight at the storefront. Not myself, because I was not a single man, but there were people that lived in that storefront. And what happened was that the rental agent said, well, the storefront was going to cost $100 per month. But he said that I also have an apartment in the same building, it's just across the courtyard, for only $80 per month. And it was, I had a look at it, and it was pretty well furnished. It had a lounge room, a bedroom, a kitchen, and a bathroom. And for the Lower East Side, it was a very clean looking place. And so I looked at my friend, and we thought, well, $80 a month, we could come up with that amount in addition to the storefront. So we decided that would be it. And that's where Prabhupada stayed. That was his first you might say, civilized place to live.
How?
And one last is that after Prabhupada was there, after he'd been to the West Coast and came back, he got a little bit ill, and Brahmananda tells a story about how he was trying to find a doctor to diagnose what was wrong with Prabhupada. And because it was Labor Day weekend in September of 1966, he couldn't find any medical centers that were open. He couldn't find any doctors. Finally, he did find a doctor. The doctor was an elderly man, kind of disheveled looking, and he went into Prabhupada's room and diagnosed him. And then Brahmananda, as he tells it, went into another room, and he asked the doctor, he said, the doctor, the devotees were all wearing jeans and t-shirts, and the doctor didn't know what to think. He was just kind of like mesmerized by the whole situation, but he saw something that was unique about Prabhupada. Anyway, they went into another room, and Brahmananda asked the doctor, what's your diagnosis? What do you think? And he kind of said in kind of muffled tones that, well, he said, the old man prays too much. He should get outside and he should go for walks. And then what Brahmananda didn't know is that Prabhupada overheard this conversation, and he heard everything that the so-called doctor had said. And when Brahmananda went back and Prabhupada asked him what the doctor had to say, and he told him, he said, yes, I heard him say that, and he's given some very good advice. And Brahmananda thought, well, how can good advice come from such a mangy character? And Prabhupada said, actually, he's given very good advice. And that was the beginning of his morning walks, his legendary morning walks. And even when they were in the Swiss Alps in a resort town called St. Moritz, he was walking inside the hotel room, up and down the hotel corridor. He was so committed to walking every day. And that became the legendary morning walks. It all happened from that disheveled looking doctor that they found on Labor Day.
So Prabhupada in his apartment in 26 Second Avenue, he had a bathroom and so on, but the devotees that were living in the front, they didn't have a bathroom. As far as I know, the building is just threadbare, right? Just there's a big hole. That's it. So did they use Prabhupada's bathroom?
I don't know, because I didn't live there. I don't know what they used for bathroom, but they used something, because there was probably about 5 or 6 people living there. Anyways, I probably should end here, because you seem to be running out of questions, and I could talk for literally hours if I wanted to, but it's all in, I think I said a lot in 26 Second Avenue, and I'm very grateful to have had this opportunity to talk with you and see you again, and all of you, and I'm working with Parijat a little bit on a book called Divine Nature. It's an updated version of spiritual. It's called A Spiritual Perspective on the Environmental Crisis. It was written originally in 1996, and this is an updated version, and I have a profile of Parijata in it. And it's in the process of being, it's in the pre-production process. It's in the hands of Savas and Archita and Dravida at the moment. And also, I've started a website with Vishnu John, who's sitting here with me, called outofthisworldstudios.org. Outofthisworldstudios.org. That's it. It's I don't know.
You can see it on the screen.
Anyway, if you log on to outofthisworld.org, you'll hear stories of my associations with Prabhupada in the early days, and also how it led to my taking up this missionary service. And in the future, I will tell more interesting anecdotes or stories that I've heard that I know about Prabhupada that seem to bring about a kind of revolution in the world. Outofthisworldstudios.org. Just you can log on to it if you have a laptop computer or a handheld device. Outofthisworldstudios.org, and we've done about 6 episodes so far, and we're going to continue with it. And right now it's bi-weekly or fortnightly, and I probably am going to increase it to weekly and even more than that, depending on what's happening. So if you want to hear more, please log on to that. And if you get a chance to get the book, Miracle on Second Avenue, and you like to read, you can find out some more about what happened in the early days from that book. So again, I wish to thank Sarvatma for this opportunity and all of you for being a part of this. And if there's anything I can do to assist in the Gita Nagari project or any of your other projects, iFast or wherever you are, I'll do my best to help. Thank you again.
I want to thank you on my name and name of all the devotees gathered here for your participation, for your kindness, and for having actually made possible that Prabhupada was comfortable enough to, and that he was able to spread the movement with your help and with the help of others. And you will never be forgotten, as you are one of the pioneers in this movement. So if this movement is meant to save the world, you are one of the first ones to attend to it. So we thank you. And I would like to ask the devotees, go ahead.
Another thing you can watch if you have access to it is a podcast called Wisdom of the Sages, and you can see on YouTube, because they're uploaded to YouTube after I'm doing it. Otherwise, it comes at a very early time on Tuesday morning. It's something like 6 o'clock in the morning. But if you go onto YouTube, you can just see my part. And if you're familiar at all with Wisdom of the Sages, that's what it is. It's Ray Capo and Kastuba listing it. So thank you again. Doing another one tonight with them. Thanks again, and thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Maharaj. To the devotees assembled here, I want Agari Prabhu to show a video of Murwilumba, where Maharaj is staying at the New Govardhan farm in New South Wales in Australia, and is right now under